All right, this is note 7.3. These are pedigrees. So we're going to be going over some really cool tools to map out family trees. Okay. So sometimes we want to visualize how traits are passed on in multiple generations. Okay. So we've used Punnett squares before to visualize how a trait is passed on from the parent to the offspring. Okay. And so that's just one parent to one offspring. But sometimes we want to visualize how maybe a great-grandfather passed on something to a grandfather, which passed on something to his daughter, who passed on something to, his granddaughter. Okay? So we want to represent how traits are passed on in a family. And we're going to use pedigrees to do that. So people have used pedigrees to discover diseases and how by mapping them out, mapping out the phenotypes and genotypes, they can actually figure out if it's recessive or if it's a dominant disease, where the mutation is, that kind of stuff. And so they call these family trees pedigrees. The word pedigrees comes from a Latin word. All right, pedi means foot. So a pedestrian is someone who walks on foot. And gree comes from the Latin word for crane. Okay, a crane is kind of like a stork. It's a bird, and they have feet that are shaped like this, right? So this kind of looks like a family tree, where you could say, oh, here's the father and the kids or something like that. So it looks like a foot of a crane, and so we call them a pedigree. Okay, so we're going to draw a pedigree here. Before we do that, we need to know how to represent different people. So if we look at a square right here, that square is going to represent a male person. Okay, this circle is going to represent a female person. What do you think it means if we have a square and a circle combined? Well, that's if they are married. Let's change that there. Right, they are married. What do you think this means? What if they branch down and kind of connect, almost like fruit hanging off of a tree? Well, those are going to be the children. Right? So those are our tools for how we're going to draw our family tree. Okay, let's start off here. So let's do we'll start with a woman here, and follow me as I draw this pedigree. Try to keep it in the same location. Okay, let's name her Anne. All right, so Anne, there's Anne. So Anne decides to marry her high school sweetheart, and so there we go. Anne's going to marry, let's name him Sam. Okay, Anne marries Sam. All right, so that represents a marriage right there. And let's say that they have one son. Then I'm going to draw just a line down like this, and I'm going to draw a box, because a box represents male. Now, already you might be like, oh, how do I remember which is which? A circle is a female, and a square is a man. Okay, so here's how I remember it. The circle kind of looks like an O, and I just think of mom, because mom is a female. Okay, and when I think of a square, I think of Carl Fredrickson from Up, because he kind of has a square face, and so I just think he's a male, he has a square face, and then the circle is mom. Okay, so here they have a son. Anne and Sam have a son together, and that son grows up and he marries a woman, and they have some kids. Okay, so let's say that they have a son and a daughter. How am I going to represent that? Well, I'm going to draw a vertical line like this, kind of like a tree branch, and then have some fruit hanging off of it. That's their kids, all right? So this is their daughter, and this would be their son. Now, let's say that the daughter marries. Then I'm going to draw just another line right here. Okay, they're married, and let's say that they have kids. So I'm going to bring this down, and let's give them a daughter and another daughter, and let's give them a son. So here they have 3 kids. All right. And let's say that the son right here, well, let's say that he marries somebody, and they, whoops. All right, and so let's say they have kids. Let's give them a son and a daughter this time. Looks like a face, kind of. All right, so I'll put the son here, and I'll put the daughter here. All right, now the mother has her own family, right? The mother in this case. So we could also draw the mother's family. So how would I draw her? Let's give her a brother here. So I'll give her a brother over here. So that's her brother, that's her husband. And let's give them parents. I'll put the father over here and the mother over here. It doesn't really matter, so I could put the father over here and the mother over here, as long as they have a line. Okay? Wow, so here we got a family tree. Let's label these. All right, let's pick a name here. Let's name this guy Bill. All right, we're gonna reference everything with reference to Bill. All right, so who is this person right here? That's Bill's sister. So I'll just label that sister. And who's this? This is Bill's father. What about this? This person is Bill's mother. It's a circle, so it's a female. This is square, so it's a male. So this mother has her own family here. What do you call it when the mother has a brother? That's Bill's uncle. All right, so Bill's uncle is the brother of his mother. And his grandparents would be his mother's parents. And so would this be his grandfather or grandmother? That would be his grandfather. This person would be his grandmother. All right, so now we've kind of mapped out this maternal side of him. Let's go over to the paternal side. So let's trace it through the father. Who is this person in relation to the father? Oh, that's the father's sister. So that makes it Bill's aunt. Which would make the guy who's married to her Bill's uncle. Now, who are the kids of his aunt and uncle? Those are Bill's cousins. All right, so this is all in relation to Bill. So Bill's cousins are here. Well, so that's the father's sister's side. What if we go up a little bit? Who's his father's mother? Well, that'd be this person right here. So that would be also grandmother. But it would be the paternal grandmother. So grandmother on dad's side. Because he has 4 grandparents here. This would be what? The grandfather. Here, let's just do grandpa. Okay, so that's his grandpa. Well, the parents of the grandpa, who's that? We get back all the way to Ann and Sam. And those would be the great-grandparents. So here's the great-grandma. I'm just going to put G-ma. G-ma. And here's the great-grandpa. So Sam is Bill's great-grandpa. Bill is Sam's great-grandson. This is how we would represent a family tree. If you didn't get all that, go ahead and pause and make sure that you've copied this diagram over. The last thing that we need to do is label the generations. So we would label this with Roman numerals. So I'm going to label that generation 1. Over here, these are the grandparents. So that's generation 2. Over here, this is the 3rd generation. So I'm going to represent that with Roman numerals. And then I'm going to represent this as the 4th generation. Okay, so let's label these here as generations. And when you draw a family tree, you want to label the generations with Roman numerals. So you're going to label them with Roman numerals. Great. Okay, so now we know how to create a family tree and how to use squares and circles to represent males and females marrying and having kids. Let's explore how we can pass on traits, because this family has all sorts of genetic traits that determine their phenotypes. So, for instance, maybe some of them have brown eyes, some of them have blue eyes, some of them have dark skin, some of them have light skin, some of them have dry earwax, some of them have wet earwax, some of them have curly hair, some of them have straight hair. And so we want to figure out, how do those get passed on? Because sometimes we have these mysteries like, hey, how come none of my parents have this trait, but I do? So we want to figure that out by mapping out all of these traits in the relationships. All right, so let's go down here to tracking inheritance. So we're going to shade in circles to indicate how they are affected by a disease or by a condition. So just a disorder or a condition or a normal trait, it's not necessarily good or bad, or sometimes a disease. Like we do want to trace certain diseases that are passed through, and pedigrees help scientists do that, such as sickle cell anemia. Okay, so in our pedigrees, and just to kind of give you a preview, this is what they look like. All right, so pedigrees kind of look like this. They have different shades. All right, so we'll get to those in a moment, but let's just look here at the legend here. If we have a circle that's not filled in, that simply means the person is not affected. So they are not affected by the condition. They don't have the condition. They don't have any genetics for it. So, maybe they are not affected by sickle cell anemia. We would shade in the square or the circle all the way if that person was affected. So a person who's affected means that they actually experience the condition and it affects their life. And maybe you visibly see it. So maybe they have red hair or they have Huntington's disease. Now, there's a third option, and that might be that they carry, all right, they're a carrier. If they carry a gene but don't express it because maybe it's like recessive, then they're considered to be a carrier. They kind of secretly carry it. So you can kind of think of them as a secret carrier. Okay. So, for instance, let's say sickle cell anemia is a lowercase a. That's a mutation, a version of a gene that can occur that can cause your cells, your red blood cells, to have a sickle cell shape, and so you have a disease. If a person is AA, do they have a disease? No, they don't. So they would just be a circle. If a person is little a, they do have a disease. But what if the person is a little a? Well, in that case, they read the dominant gene. And so if this is the disease, then guess what? If they have that little disease right there, the little disease gene, they're not going to express it because they still have the dominant term. So we would actually just shade them in like this because they carry the gene and they could pass it on, but they don't actually experience it because they have a dominant covering them up. So we'll get some more practice with that. You can also have this with females who have XX. So if they inactivate one of the X chromosomes, okay, they might carry that X chromosome, but they don't read it, and so they would be a carrier for a disease. All right, we're going to look at some examples here. So we're going to look first at red hair and look at how red hair is passed on through families. Then we're going to look at polydactylism. Actually, we'll look at that first. And that's when a person has extra fingers. So you notice this person's hand has 6 fingers. There's a gene that causes that to happen, and it's a disorder. And then we're going to talk about color blindness, which is on the X chromosome, and which we've talked about before. So we're going to look at how color blindness is traced through families. All right, let's look at polydactylism. So if you look at your chromosome 7, and we were to zoom in, you would have 2 pairs of the chromosomes inside of your nucleus, right? So you have 1 pair from your father and 1 pair from your mother. Okay? And on one of those, you have a version of a gene that codes for how many fingers you have. So, maybe you have D here and D here. So your mother gave you a little d and your father gave you a little d, which means they gave you the same version of the gene, and that version of the gene is actually the correct one. So here's a mistake people often make. They often think that recessive means bad. That's not the case. Sometimes recessive is the right gene, and dominant is the bad one. Dominant and recessive don't have to do with good and bad. They just have to do with what covers up what. So here, this says that a person with a mutation that causes extra fingers, that mutation is dominant. So if we were to look at a person who has DD, big D, so homozygous dominant, so here they had big D, would they have the disease or not? They would, because it's dominant. So this person would actually have extra fingers. Now, here's a question. What if it was a capital D, lowercase d here? And maybe their father gave them a big D and their mother gave them a little d. In that case, you would still read the dominant gene. And the dominant gene is that mutation for extra fingers. So this person would actually have extra fingers. It's kind of weird to think of diseases as being dominant, but sometimes they are. Only when you have DD will you have 5 fingers on a hand. So if you have 5 fingers on a hand, you probably have the lowercase d per hand. Okay. All right, let's look at an example here. So here's a family tree. So Ray is a guy, and he married Leah. How many kids did they have? Well, Ray and Leah had 3 kids. 1, 2, 3. And one of those kids, Ben, he married Amy. How many kids did Ben and Amy have? Well, they had 3. 1, 2, 3. So these are the grandchildren of Ray and Leah. They have 3 granddaughters, 1 grandson. Ray and Leah have 2 sons, 1 daughter, and the girl who married Ben. This black circle, what does it represent? The black circle represents the fact that they are affected by polydactylism. So Leah has extra fingers. A family tree like this is kind of common in the Amish community. So in many different Amish communities in America, you see a lot of people have polydactylism. So this isn't, it's just because it's in that gene pool a little bit more. Okay, so what happened here? Well, Leah has 6 fingers on her hand, and she married Ray, who does not have 6 fingers. And what's kind of weird is they had some kids, and some of them did not have the 6 fingers because they have a white spot here, and some of them did have the 6 fingers. And so their son had 6 fingers. Actually, he's the only child that they had that had 6 fingers. Okay, so here, let's label this as 6 fingers. And this person has 6 fingers. But this person, Ray, he has 5 fingers. And their daughter has 5 fingers. And Ben has 5 fingers. Alright. Now, So some of them had 6 fingers, and then here's what happens. So Ben, you know, he wants to marry, and he really wants to marry someone that is similar to what he knows, and so he marries Amy, who also has 6 fingers. So he's like, hey, I know you have 6 fingers, but I'm going to marry you, and so they do. And they have 3 kids, and all of them have 6 fingers. What? What happened? All right, so here's Ben. He's just like, what? Like, my father, who did not have 6 fingers, married a woman who had 6 fingers, and some of his kids didn't have 6 fingers, and some of them did. But when I married this woman who had 6 fingers, we only had 6 finger kids. Well, what's going on there? All right, let's look at a Punnett square to help us visualize this a little bit more. Let's think about the genotype that Leah has. On one of her chromosome 7s, she has a capital D, so she has that gene that causes polydactylism. And then on the other one, she doesn't. So she's either going to pass on in her egg a little d, which is correct, or the mutated big D. And Ray, well, he only has one type, and that's the unmutated gene he can pass on. So what are the possible children that could result from this? Well, let's fill out the Punnett square. So here, this square represents a possible child. Maybe Ray sends on a little d through his sperm, and then Leah passes on a little d through her egg, and when they combine and fertilize, they create a person who has little d, little d. So that person would not have extra fingers. These people would, though. So they have a half and half chance, they have a 50% chance of having a child with polydactylism. Well, that's kind of what we see here, right? Sorry. So here, some of their kids have it and some of them don't. Now, it's not exactly half and half because, let me see if I can fix this here. Yep, sorry. It's not exactly half and half because they only have 3 kids. And so remember, this only shows the possible kids. So this shows what they could possibly have. This shows what they actually have. So remember, the Punnett square only shows me probability. This one, the pedigree, shows me the actual kids that they have. All right, so that's the Punnett square for Ray and Leah. So that's why some of them had 6 fingers, and then others of them didn't. So this person would be here. Actually, let's color code this green. I might be doing too much color coding. Sorry. So that's the proper gene. This person is proper. This person is proper. This person is the gene. So they had 6 fingers. Now, Ben, he marries someone like his mother who has polydactylism. But notice this. They might have the same phenotype, Amy and Leah, but Amy actually has a different genotype. Amy can only pass on a big capital D, which is the mutated version. So let's represent this here. So let's say Amy, she has a big D and a big D, and Ben, he has a little d and a little d. Okay, so Ben got his little d from his father, and the other one from his mother. Amy got a capital D from both of her parents. So both of her parents must also have polydactylism. Runs in the family. Okay, so what are their kids going to be like? Well, if we fill out the Punnett square, all of them have a capital D. And remember, that capital D, that's what is the mutation. Mutation, mutation, mutation. And it's dominant. So that means they only can have kids who have polydactylism. So all of their kids have extra fingers. All right? Using a pedigree helps us visualize why, Ray and Leah, who's a 5-fingered hand, marries a 6-fingered woman. Okay, she has some who they have kind of half and half, but then Ben and Amy, who look the same on the outside, can only have kids with polydactylism, and that's because Amy has a different genotype. All right, so now we can visualize how that's traced throughout families. Now keep in mind, this is all dominant inheritance, so that's a dominant trait being inherited in the family. Does the condition skip any generations? Let's look back at the generations. Whoops. Sorry. All right. Here's our generations. We got generation 1, generation 2, and generation 3. Okay. Notice how in generation 1, somebody has polydactylism. In generation 2, somebody has polydactylism. And in generation 3, somebody has polydactylism. So, did it skip any generations? No, it actually didn't. That's a clue that this is dominant inheritance. You can tell that the dominant gene is what's mutated because it is in every single generation. It doesn't really get skipped. Are there any carriers? Well, let's remember what a carrier is. A carrier is somebody who has the... Whoa! Sorry. Okay, a carrier is somebody who has the gene, but they don't actually experience it. So they would look like this. Do we have any of those? No, we don't. All right, so no, there are no carriers. And that's something because a dominant gene, if you have the dominant gene, you have to read it. You can't secretly carry a gene if it's dominant. You have to read it. And so there are no carriers for a dominant generation. So that's a clue that this is dominant. Let's go down and look at red hair. On chromosome pair 16, there's a gene that codes for a protein, and this protein is called MC1R. Okay, this protein regulates the amount of melanin or brown pigment that's inside of your hair. So if it's mutated, it causes red hair. Now this mutation is different because this mutation is recessive. The last one we looked at was dominant, but this one's recessive. All right, so let's look at this one. I just realized my letters here are different. I'm going to use H's for this one. So let's change this to big H, big H. Big H, little h. Big H, little h. All right, so if you're homozygous dominant, are you going to experience red hair? No, because red hair is recessive. And here this is all dominant. So non-red hair. Okay, what if you have a big H from your father and a little h from your mother? Well, in that case, you would still have non-red hair because that big H from your father is going to cover up that one from your mother. Okay, this could also be from your mother and the other one from your father. It doesn't really matter. All right, so this one would be non-red hair. Only if... Sorry, I did that one wrong again. Okay, only if you have two recessive alleles. Little h, are you going to read it? And you're actually going to have red hair. Only if you have two small recessive alleles. All right, so let's revisit our family. So we know this was a family where 6 fingers runs through the family. And now we're going to look at how red hair runs through the family. So Ray and Leah, okay, again, they marry. Ray has a capital H and a little h. So does he have red hair? No, he does not. He has brown hair. Let's select brown here. Okay, let's say he has brown or non-red, basically. You'd say non-red. Let's just assume in this family that if you don't have red hair, then you have brown hair. So we're just going to assume that. Maybe for another family, it's black hair or something like that, but we're just going to assume brown. Leah, she would have brown hair because even though she has a little red hair gene right there, she covers it up with her normal brown-haired one. Now, here's the weird thing, because Ray and Leah don't have red hair, but they have one son who does have red hair. That's Ben. So Ben has red hair. What? Well, how did he get red hair? And here's the weird thing. Even though Ben has red hair, he can't pass it on to any of his kids. All right, we're going to do this again here. Sorry. All right, so look at these kids, all right? None of them have red hair. They're all brown because they all have dominant, okay? So he cannot... This is just kind of weird because when the father The father here has red hair, and then he has kids who don't have any red hair, and then the parents don't have red hair, and then they have a kid who does have red hair. So what on earth is going on here? Well, we need to map this out. Okay, so let's look again at Leah here. Leah has a big H and a little h, and Ray, he has a big H and a little h. Let's say Ray passes on the big H in his sperm, and Leah passes on the big H in her egg. What are we going to get? We're going to get a child who's diploid and who has capital H, capital H. Let's go ahead and complete this square here. Okay. So, these are, again, are the possible offspring. These are the actual offspring. And here, for sure, let's color code these here. Okay, so let's go, let's choose yellow, okay? So their daughter here was when the father gave this big H and the mother gave this big H. Okay? Let's think about what if, let's do, what do we do? Pink here, okay? If the father gives his big H, but the mother gives her small H allele, then that person would have not that genotype, but they would have this one. Okay, which will be this. Now, if they both give their small H alleles, okay, then you'd get a child like Ben. Okay, and so Ben would get his father's sperm passed on a little H allele, so the mutated red, and then the Leah gave on the mutated red as well in her egg, and so then he gets red hair. Okay, so that's kind of how you visualize them passing this down. Notice how there's half and half. So Ray here, he has, he passes on only one half. So if you get two whites, then you get that. Two blacks, you get that. Okay, the black represents the red hair. I know it's kind of confusing with the colors, but all right. So this means Ray and Leah are actually carriers. They're carriers of the red allele. And so if you know a family where maybe both of their parents, both of the father and the mother have brown hair, and then one of their children has red hair, the reason is because their parents were carriers. So they had one copy, and they both happened to give that copy to their child. All right, so Ben has red hair, and so we're going to do little lowercase here to represent the Punnett square for the red hair for Ben and Amy on this pedigree. That kind of rhymes. Not really. Okay, so Amy, what does she have? Well, she has a dominant and a dominant. Oh, now we figure out the reason for why none of their kids have red hair. Why? Because she can only pass on the dominant version, and guess what that dominant version codes for? Non-red hair. So, even though Ben is always going to have the possibility of donating his lowercase red allele, their children will always get the dominant one from their mother. And so the dominant one from their mother is always going to mask it. And so all their children are carriers. Okay, so they all carry the red gene, but they don't express it because they have the non-red gene there as well. Okay, so the only person who has red hair is Ben. None of Ben's children have red hair. Why not? Well, that's because he married a girl, Amy, and Amy passed on dominant hair color alleles. And so those, they kind of covered up Ben's alleles. So I'm sure Ben was kind of mad. He's like, hey, I had all this wealth of red hair genes and you just had to cover them up with your big H's. All right, and then they had these kids who are all carriers, so none of them had red hair. Oh, sad. Sorry, poor Ben. So poor Ben's the only, at the family reunion, he's the only person who has red hair. Everyone gives him a hard time. Sorry, Ben. All right. So that's kind of how we trace a recessive thing. So this we call recessive inheritance. Because you'll notice there are a lot of carriers here. The trait or the condition gets hidden a lot. Sometimes it skips a generation, and very few people have it. This is in contrast to the dominant one, because the dominant never skipped a generation, and a lot of people had it. So that's the difference between a condition that is recessive and dominant. All right, so that's how things are passed on there. Now we're going to look at something even more special, and this is, we're going to look later this week at some X and Y things in royalty, and some, how did the queens of England have different conditions and stuff, and that'll be pretty cool. But before we get there, we need to understand how diseases and conditions are passed on through the sex chromosomes. So, if a gene is located on a certain chromosome, and that chromosome is either an X or a Y, and we call those sex chromosomes, so either X or Y in humans, okay, that gene is going to be expressed a little differently depending on the sex of the individual. So if the person's a male, it might be expressed differently than a female. Okay, so remember, for females, what do they have? Well, they have an X and an X. What can they do to one of these X chromosomes? Ooh, they can inactivate it. All right, so if you need a review of X inactivation, go to Unit 6.4, or the theme 6.4, and your notes will help you review X inactivation, because remember, a female has two X's, and she can always choose to kind of block one out and just read the other one, in which case you're inactivating one. So she's going to express things just a little bit differently, because males who have X and Y only have one X chromosome, and they have to read it. They have no choice. They can't inactivate that one. They've only got one. Now, remember, there is a gene that causes color blindness. You really can't tell red from orange. This gene is located on an X chromosome. So here's the kind of weird thing, because we want to make sure that we know that it's on the X chromosome. So we can't just use letters like A or B or B. Like, we can't just write them like that. We have to write them on the X chromosome, because we have to know that they're on the X chromosome. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to do X and then write a little, what's called a superscript. A superscript. Think of Superman. He's flying up there, okay? So Superman, he's up there. So we represent the allele up there. All right. So this is a mutation. It causes color blindness. So let's look at this table here. If a person has XX, what are they going to have? What sex are they going to be? All right. Under most typical circumstances, they're going to be a female. Okay. And XX here, this will also be a female. This person will be a female. What about XY? Well, that's going to be a male. Now, let's say that a female does not have any mutations. She's just going to see normally, okay? So she's going to have normal vision. But let's say that this female over here, she has a mutation on one of her X's. There's two possibilities for what phenotype they could have. So, for instance, if she were to inactivate that chromosome, then she would have normal vision. But what if she inactivated the other chromosome? If she inactivated that one, then she would be colorblind. So it really depends. But we are going to visualize that through the circle or the square. Because if she has normal vision, she's going to look like this. Sorry, not like that. She's not going to look like that. If she has normal vision, she's going to look like that. And if she is colorblind, then she's going to look like that. So if she's normal, she's going to carry that one. And colorblind, she's going to do that one. For this female, she's just going to look like that because she doesn't even have a copy. So here, this would be a carrier or a person who's affected. So it could be either one. And the female here, I should have drawn those circles for the other ones. Okay, the female here is, this person has to be affected because even if she inactivates this chromosome, she's still got the mutation. So if she has 2 copies of the mutation, she's done for. She can't see color. All right, so she's colorblind. Now here, let's look at this guy, because this guy, does he have a mutation on his X chromosome? He does not. So he just sees normally. But now this dude, he has one here. Can he inactivate this? No, he can't. Because he has to read it. The X chromosome has some pretty essential genes on it. So he has to read it. So he would be colorblind. Notice there's no carrier for the males. Unless they had Klinefelters, but we're not gonna talk about that in this chapter. Okay, so no carriers that are males. So let's look at colorblindness. Okay, we're gonna revisit Ray and Leah's family, and instead we're gonna look at their X chromosome. We're gonna look at their colorblindness gene here. Okay, so look, Leah here has an X and then an XB. Is she colorblind? No, she's not, because she's a carrier. Ray is not colorblind either because he doesn't have a mutation. Now, they have 3 kids. Daughter, son, and Ben, the other son. Okay, so they have 3 kids here. And you'll notice this kid, well, she's a daughter, and she inherited a normal X chromosome from her father. And then she inherited that's nice. Okay, she inherited a mutated one from her mother, but she still is just a carrier, so she's actually not colorblind. Okay, so Leah is not colorblind. Ray is colorblind. No, sorry, he's not. He's normal. She's normal. Their daughter's normal. Their son here, well, what did he get? He got, I see, okay. What did he get? He got his Y chromosome from his father, and then a normal X chromosome from his mother. Way to go, Mom. You passed on a normal one here. Okay? So she passed on that one, and then he passed on the Y chromosome, and they're all normal there. So that's kind of what it looks like. Now, Ben. Poor Ben. Okay? Ben got his Y chromosome from his father, but now his mother gave him the mutated version, so he's actually colorblind. Oh no! Okay, so Ben is colorblind. Their son has colorblindness, and it's all because of his mother's fault, and his mother didn't even have colorblindness, so she just doesn't even know what to think anymore, and it causes this huge rift in their relationship, and Ben actually never wants to speak to Leah again, and it's really sad, and you can read all about it in the latest tabloids. But yeah, so Ben is there, and he doesn't speak to his mom because he got from her the colorblindness gene, and he's so mad. And what happened is he married Amy. Amy doesn't carry any colorblindness. Like, she Amy kind of gets roped into this whole family situation. She does not even have colorblindness, and so she's just kind of looking at this whole family like, what are you doing? You guys are crazy with your colorblind issues. And she marries in, and all their kids, none of them are colorblind, but 2 of their daughters are carriers. Okay, so what happened there? Well, Amy, she passed on an X chromosome, but then their father passed on this XB, all right? He passed that on to his daughters as well. And what do you know? The father, he had a Y chromosome. Sorry. Wow, what is going on with my colors? All right, he had a Y chromosome. He passed that on to his son. And so the X chromosome that the son has, well, he can only get that from the mother. And so he gets that X from Amy there. Okay. And yeah, all right, so that's that family there. Let's look at the Punnett square here to represent this. So Ray and Leah, how are we going to do a Punnett square with sex chromosomes? Well, let's figure this out. So Ray has a normal X and a Y. And then Leah, she has an X and a colorblind X. Colorblind X chromosome. So, what are the possibilities here? Well, Ray could pass on an X in his sperm, and Leah could pass on a normal X in her egg, and they have a normal child who does not, who's not colorblind, and it's a daughter. Or Ray could pass on a X in his sperm, and then a colorblind one from Leah could come in the egg, and then they have a daughter again, a daughter who carries the colorblind gene, like this one. Or what's another possibility? Well, Leah could pass on her X, and Ray could pass on his Y, and they'd have a son, and there's no mutation. Or Leah could pass on her X with the mutation and a Y from Ray. And there you see it right there. That's Ben. Ben! Oh, that's Ben, okay? So Ben got an XB from his mother and a Y from his father, and he cannot inactivate that X, and so he's stuck with the only colorblind copy, and he has no way to inactivate it, so he is colorblind. So then, Ben leaves the family forever, never talks to them again. There's Amy. So what does Ben do? Well, Ben's got a mutated X and the Y chromosome. And Amy, well, she's got 2 normal X's. Let's break down Amy's normal X's here. So all of their children are going to have a normal X from Amy. And if they're males, they could have a Y chromosome from Ben, or if they have daughters, they could have a mutated X chromosome. Okay. So now that's what we see here is we saw that Ben and Amy had, these are the actual children. So here's this daughter, XXB, and so that could be any one of these right here. Then they had a son, okay, who's XY, and that could be that possibility there, okay? So again, these are all probabilities that manifest themselves here. Now, let's say that their granddaughter married. So let's say that she marries a guy, and he, let's say that he has a normal, well, let's make him colorblind. So he's colorblind. So their daughter, who should we name her? Let's name her, I don't know. Let's name her Deb. Deb, okay? So Deb, she's not colorblind, but she marries a guy who is. Let's name him, I don't know. Let's go with Sam again. Okay, Sam. So if Deb and Sam, they marry, well, look at what happens here. Here's the surprising thing. Oh my gosh, what's going on? I want to erase, not draw. Erase. Erase you. Okay, whatever. All right, so Deb and Sam, if they had a daughter, that daughter could have an XB and an XB, which means she would be colorblind. But guess what? That's pretty rare. That's rare if that happens. So we hardly ever see women with these conditions. Sometimes we do, and that could be the possibility there. All right, so can the father, let's answer these questions. Inside of X-linked, which means the gene is on the X chromosome, X-linked inheritance, can the father pass on colorblindness to his son? Well, let's look at an example here. Here's Ben, and here's Ben's X chromosome. It's mutated. Can he pass this on to his son? Oh, no, because his son does not get his X chromosome from his father. He gets it from his mother. So he only gets his Y chromosome from his father. So that XB will never be passed on to the son. So you'll never see a condition passed on from father to son if it's X-linked. So father passes on his Y chromosome, not the X. Whoop, 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 whoop. Oh, my X is going away. Relationship issues. All right, can a mother without colorblindness pass it on to the son? Well, let's look back up here. Leah did not have colorblindness. She had normal vision, and yet she passed it on to her son. It's her fault. So what we see happening is that often mothers are just left and right passing on conditions to their sons, and they don't even know it because they've inactivated the condition within themselves, but the son can't inactivate the condition. So yes, the mother can. So XB, if she passes that on, she doesn't have it, but he does. Oof. All right. So what's more likely, men or women? Do they have X-linked conditions? More likely you're going to have men, because men cannot cover up their X-linked conditions. Women, they can cover that up by inactivating it. Men can't. They're stuck with it. So let's say XY, XB, all right? Here, that's more likely. Here, because here you could have, here's a woman, and if she inactivates both of these women, sorry, I just did a box, but let's do a circle. Both of these women here can inactivate one of their X chromosomes. And so they won't experience a disease. But if he has it, he's got to have it. So that's why in X-linked conditions, we see men having the disease and women not really too much. Now, that's it for our notes. And maybe some of this was a little bit confusing for you. So maybe you need to go back and rewind and kind of walk through it. But when I give you the homework, that's really going to give you a chance to practice making pedigrees and tracing them, and I'll walk you step by step through some of that. So that'll also give you a chance to practice this. If you have questions, let me know. Email me, and we can also set up a video chat to go over some of the stuff. All right, thanks, guys.